Get ready, folks. The first of 1, 2, 3 open practices to start Ohio State training camp have arrived. Welcome to a Three Thoughts Thursday on the beat. That is Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. We are presented by the Waterworks. There are also 1, 2, 3 new starters in the secondary, and it is the last of our position previews heading into camp for the Buckeyes. With our apologies to special teams, but we got that in a Freaky Friday mailbag a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I think that it is an interesting day. There's a lot of stuff we could talk about, obviously, when you are heading into a new season and training camp kicking off, but we have to go back. We must go back. We must go back to spring. We must look ahead at this BIA, the secondary that is changing faces, but I think the expectations somehow might actually be higher for this entire group. And we're going to break down cornerbacks and safeties today, not going to split them up into two groups. And part of that is because there's a lot of guys that I think
there's some overlap.
Outside of Jalen McClain, Earl Little, and Devin Sanchez, I think there's a lot of moving parts that are really going to be interesting to watch. And I think just starting there, the fact that Devin Sanchez is the most concrete piece of the cornerback puzzle is something that I don't think people would have expected heading into training camp. But it's not a knock on Jermaine Matthews so much as it is a testimony of his flexibility and the chance of him maybe being a guy who moves inside depending on what Dom Kelly does or Jay Timmons does or anyone else.
Yeah, I think it would be a surprise nationally, Jermaine Matthews with the body of work that he has, coming off of a year as a starting cornerback opposite Davis Nigbanosin, who's now in the NFL. You think, well, that's going to be the ascension. He's going to be the star, and that would not be the piece that you would potentially move. But we saw how productive, how disruptive, how much game-changing ability that Jermaine Matthews had when he moved inside to nickel and played in that role. I think the Illinois game comes to mind right away when Lorenzo Styles Jr. was injured. He's also in the NFL, by the way. Caleb Downs is too. Those are the three spots, if you're just catching up, just getting ready for training camp, that Ohio State, has to fill that role. But there is locally, I think, a really great understanding of what Devin Sanchez can be. And that probably exists to some extent nationally as well, given his 5-star recruiting profile. The documentary crews following him a year ago, the fact that he played on day one against Texas as a true freshman. There's an understanding of that, but I think making the leap to say Devin Sanchez is the entrenched guy. He's the one that you are going to put out there on an island and expect him to dominate for Ohio State. That doesn't mean that it's at the expense of Jermaine Matthews or that it's a slight on him, as you mentioned, but Devin Sanchez isn't one that's going to be talked about moving into nickel or playing safety or helping out in any other way. Jermaine Matthews has that versatility and the flexibility, and I don't know that his ceiling as a lockdown corner is viewed quite the same way as it is with Devin Sanchez.
Is there, in recent history, a player that more people expected like a huge jump from year one to year two more than Devin Sanchez? I'm not sure if I'm wording that correctly, but it feels like to me he is up near the top of the list of people in the last decade where you're like, well, freshman year was this, second year he's not only going to be better, he's going to be a superstar without really evidence from year one to support it.
I think everyone, I'm trying to think of a comparison for that at corner where it's more valid, because the only other, like the no doubt it's going to happen. You saw how much Ohio State trusted him. You know what the athletic profile, the recruiting profile, all that was like. In year two for Chase Young, everyone was like, this is it. It's about to happen. So I guess in that time frame, you could roughly say there was that same level of confidence in Jeff Okudah, and that bore itself out. He lived up to that potential at Ohio State. Whatever happened when NFL career beyond that, injuries, all those other things, doesn't really matter for the sake of this conversation. But I don't know. I would say that if we're just going off the cuff here, the workload that Jeff Okudah got early on in his career is roughly equivalent to what Devin Sanchez got last year.
Yeah, that might be the best comp. It's such an interesting conversation because as we said at the jump here, like Jermaine Matthews is heading into year 3 as a starting cornerback at Ohio State, and I think that there are more people who have questions about whether or not he can hold on to his job as opposed to Devin Sanchez holding on to his, which is something that I think coming out of last year, and maybe it's partially because of the way the Indiana game went for Jermaine, the way the Miami game went, he sort of was picked on. Some of that probably his own fault because he takes chances out there maybe that he shouldn't when you're playing team defense. But ultimately, it's interesting because we can look at the secondary and feel pretty confident that you have Jalen McClain and Earl Little who are going to be on the field most of the time. You can feel pretty confident that you're going to have Jermaine Matthews and Devin Sanchez on the field most of the time. But there's no guarantee that Jermaine, to your point, has to be on the outside, because if Dom Kelly, the Georgia transfer, can rise up in training camp, then all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of different conversations when it comes to the slot.
Well, because it's a multifaceted debate when you're dealing with Jermaine Matthews, because he has shown that he can be very effective in another role. More effective, less effective, I don't know. It would have to be not in relation to what he does at corner or nickel based on those snaps from a year ago, but it becomes a debate. We've had this, we've talked all offseason about the offensive line and what's Josh Padilla relative to Ian Moore. Maybe, for this scenario for Jermaine Matthews, it is, all right, what do you get at corner from Jermaine compared to Dominic Kelly or Cam Calhoun on the rise? Or if you are starting to look at that at nickel, where you could have a Terry Moore, Earl Little, Leroy Roker, or Jay Timmons.
Right.
Does Jermaine's years in the system, years in the program, familiarity with what Matt Patricia wants to do, a body of work from a year ago, does that trump all of what those guys can provide there? And so Jermaine, it's not lack of confidence or familiarity with what he can do, or concern about what his last year at Ohio State is going to look like. It's just Devin Sanchez is, that is neatly in one box, and that box is pretty secure. No one is going to break through it. But Jermaine is just like, he's in an octagon, and he's getting it from multiple different angles.
It's a question because Ohio State in the last 2 years, when Jordan Hancock was out there playing and healthy in 2024, when Lorenzo Styles was fully healthy in 2025, the defense was so much better and so much more difficult for Ohio State opponents to figure out when you have a truly impactful player in that slot position. And so whoever it ends up being, whether it's Jermaine Matthews, whether it's Jay Timmons, whether it's Terry Moore, whether it's Earl Little, it doesn't really matter, because Ohio State is going to be so multiple on defense anyway. But it does feel like that position itself, when it's being played correctly, elevates the level of the entire defense in a way that that's what Jim Knowles was trying to get to in 22 and 23.
I think it is still a scenario here where Ohio State has already elevated the depth, the playable depth that Tim Walton would view as game ready at corner. Yeah. I don't think that Dominic Kelly is far away from that, and I don't believe that Cam Calhoun is either, based on how much experience he has elsewhere. Now he's well traveled, and it's been a bunch of different schemes and systems, but that could also work to his benefit. And maybe at corner that doesn't matter as much as playing at safety. So it does open up a lot of different avenues and opportunities for Ohio State, especially if you have to deal with injuries at some point or the duration of the season. And I think they've ascended in the same rate at safety. If you're talking about including Jay Timmons and Jermaine Matthews in this nickel conversation and counting that as safety, that's a pool of 6 guys that you could be working with.
Yeah, and they're all going to play, so it's going to break down into matchups, who's going to play more each week. And I actually think as we head into training camp that the likelihood of Jay Timmons and Jordan Thomas both playing this year as true freshmen is actually pretty high. I wouldn't be surprised if eventually Jordan Thomas, because of the length, because of the athleticism, because of the physicality that he plays corner, he might end up ahead of Cam Calhoun at some point. So, but the question ultimately is who's filling that nickel corner, slot safety spot. And does it matter if it's Jay Timmons? Does it matter if it's Terry Moore? How does Matt Patricia, Matt Guerrieri, Tim Walton find a vibe that works to give, like, what does Terry Moore do different than Earl Little in that spot? Or what does Earl Little do different to Jay Timmons to say, well, this week, that's the guy for this sort of space? So because Jay Timmons, we know, has elite, like, a sideline to sideline speed, elite lateral quickness, but is he physically ready for the Big Ten? I don't know. I mean, Terry Moore is a former all ACC type player. So it's going to be a really
the highest rated PFF safety 2 years ago, ahead of Caleb Downs.
Which, that's not nothing. I mean, we obviously talk a lot about PFF and say you take it with a grain of salt, but it's still being taken. And if he's healthy and ready to go, then Terry Moore probably feels like the safer option. But like the conversation about Jay Timmons is not slowing down in any way. Like he is really, really good. And Ohio State was like, hey, well, this was the number 1 ranked cornerback in the country a year ago, so the expectations are there, and he's lived up to them. So now how does it play into everything else?
Are you still taking your meals with a grain of salt?
Yeah, I still salt. I like salt. I like pepper.
Okay.
I like seasoning on food. And I think one of the things that people expect is when you work with a plan like Awaken 180, that all your food is going to be bland or flavorless.
No chance.
That's just not the case. It's like, hey, load it up, spice it up, put a little spice on the pepper.
Put a little spice in that pepper.
Whatever you do, you're trying to make sure that you're enjoying eating. But the best way to enjoy eating is knowing when to stop and being able to move when you're done. And Awaken 180 really changed the way that I viewed food, not just the seasoning of it, but the timing of it and the way that I was eating, when I was eating, why I was eating. If you go to awaken180weightloss.com, you can start your journey today. And I'm not going to guarantee you nothing.
Can't guarantee it.
Except that if you put your mind to it and actually work at what the program says, you will lose weight.
It works.
It will work. And how much, that's up to you. That's up to your own personal goals. But if you go to awaken180weightloss.com, they will help you find it.
Yeah. And how Ohio State finds a way with this, I think deep, very talented, very athletic group of pieces in the secondary. There was something you mentioned about, every week deciding what's best. The thing about the 2024 secondary is that you knew who was going to be.
Yeah, there was no rotation.
There wasn't going to be a rotation. They didn't find themselves in a scenario where they had to rotate. They stayed reasonably healthy. They had one brief scare with Lathan Ransom, but they got over that.
Well, and Denzel Burke missed a little time, which opened the door for Jermaine Matthews to show people what he could do as a young guy. But yeah, that was a pretty locked in group.
But I think if we saw, anything or a lesson that we can take from year one with Matt Patricia and compare that to 2024, where Tim Walton and Matt Guerreri have been on both of those, coaching staffs and were involved, obviously, in the personnel decisions, is like a clear willingness to adapt and evolve and attack differently from week to week. And I do think if you look at this secondary, there might be a stretch in October carrying over into November where the starters that you see at the beginning of every game could be different for all of them.
Yeah.
And that will likely hinge on the scenario at nickel, like what any of those guys that we named bring. There's going to be times where you have to stop the run, and that's what Matt Patricia's priority is going to be. And that is probably, if I had to guess, a role that is more clearly defined for someone like Terry Moore than Jay Timmons, based on what you're talking about in the physical development. That, it will be, I think, very subject to change on a weekly basis, which is good because, if you're talking about saving reps and being ready for the playoff for the offense, there now might be a path for Ohio State to do that defensively that maybe it couldn't a year ago.
Yeah, and some of that's just going to be about guys being willing to move around. Some of it's just going to be about guys being willing to take coaching and say, are you better at this than you were a year ago? One thing that I don't think Matt Patricia has gotten enough credit for, it was the physical changes in what Davis Igbinosun brought to the run game. Can Jermaine Matthews make that step this year? Is Devin Sanchez willing to throw his hat in there and be physical like that? Because when you get to Illinois, Iowa, Maryland, it's going to feel like the easy part of the schedule, which is kind of crazy considering Iowa and Illinois both are probably going to be ranked when Ohio State plays them. But
Maryland won't be.
Maryland will not be. But Maryland, of that group, has the scariest offense. I mean, they've got the best quarterback of that trio, and with Malik Washington. And so you have someone that's going to get out there and test you. But who's willing to change their game for the sake of this team, and how do you balance that? Yeah, you play those 3 games, and then you have Indiana, USC, Oregon. The alignment, the setup, the guys who are out there first in those games are probably going to look different than the guys who are out there against Illinois. So are you doing that as a team player who's willing to say, hey, whatever you need, if this week Jermaine needs to go to the slot, fine. But even last year when Ohio State started to have more playable depth, when everyone was healthy, Matt Patricia didn't really want to rotate much. You had Caleb Downs, he's going to be out there. You have Jalen McClain.
Well, if you have Caleb Downs, like, why rotate that?
Right. But it was also Lorenzo Styles was out there all the time, and it was Davis Igbenogson and Jermaine Matthews. Like, there wasn't a lot of rotation. Yeah, Devin Sanchez played early, but I think that this group feels like it's more level, like everyone's kind of the same, which reminds me a little bit of the receivers outside of Jeremiah Smith, where it's like, I think most of these guys are pretty interchangeable, which is an interesting chess piece for Matt Patricia and Tim Walton and McArary, because that's just not the way it's been.
Yeah. You started right off the bat, naming 8 or 9 guys that can play, including a couple true freshmen. It's like, I can't even ask you what you think is going to be a surprise coming out of the secondary from these first 3 practices that we get to watch.
No, I mean, the only thing is I'm more and more hearing and more inclined to believe that Jay Timmons is going to be not just a guy who you play because he was a 5-star freshman and you just have to put him out there. Like, the way people are talking about him is like he has to play. He's been too good not to play. Now, how do you decide that when he didn't really finish out the spring? Obviously, he turned heads again in the summer and was impressing people with his workout, with the way that he's learning the game. He comes from an NFL background. His father played in the NFL. Like, that this kid has got more to him than just attitude, but he brings like this Jermaine Matthews confidence with like the very like professional background of the position. And I think that's a really unique blend, and he's going to play. So the question is, does he hit a wall in August or not? Because this is the dog days of summer. This is when things get hard. But this is a kid who, like, the discussion about him has been Jeremiah Smith, Marvin Harrison type, like, expectation as a freshman, which...
No, you did that exact same thing a year ago with Devin Sanchez.
100%. But that was me doing it. This is what we're hearing from people in the building, and that is decidedly different. There was expectations that Devin Sanchez was going to have to play as a freshman, but there was also conversation last spring saying, pump the brakes a little bit on Devin because there's a bigger adjustment than you think. It's been almost the opposite with Jay Timmons. It's been people saying, hey, you need to push the accelerator because this is not what we expected.
Well, I thought that was actually, really interesting to circle it back to the Devin Sanchez conversation for year one. And, I'm joking a little bit about the comparisons you made and Jeremiah Smith of corners and all that. At this time a year ago, I was saying, well, I don't think he's going to play because he doesn't have to.
Yeah.
You have IGB back. You have Jermaine Matthews back. In the nickel role, that's not even a spot that you would try and play him because you have Lorenzo Styles Jr. back, and he wasn't at this time getting, I think, enough credit for the value he was bringing.
At that point, we all had huge expectations for Aaron Scott and Bryce West.
And those two existed. I said, well, he'd have to beat those guys out. Now, he did do that, and that was the value of training camp.
Yeah.
When you're laying out what this path looks like throughout August, for Jay Timmons, does he hit a wall or not hit a wall? Devin Sanchez met the moment and then wound up earning that opportunity against Texas. And so that was meaningful in its own way because Ohio State did not have to play him. I know that
Right.
There's the other conversation about high-profile recruitment, NIL investment. You better get him out there. That wasn't why Devin Sanchez was out there against Texas. They could have done that in week 2 or 3 and, learned whatever they wanted to. They were also paying Aaron Scott and Bryce West. So they didn't let that factor into their conversation. That was, I think, a marker in the right direction and a benefit for them that Devin Sanchez had proven that he had earned that. But he didn't play perfectly. When we think about September 12th for this year, where he's going to be that lockdown corner, or expected to be, he had to go through ups and downs a year ago, and I think he's going to emerge a different player from that.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be lined up against Cam Coleman and Ryan Wingo and some really, really high-profile receivers at Texas. So it's going to be a wake-up call for anybody. That's going to be a barometer game for sure.
Jinx.
But Jay enters this season a little bit different in that Ohio State opens with Ball State. He's going to play in that game no matter what.
Sure.
So the question is then, how does he – what do they actually do with him against Texas will be really, really fascinating to watch because, again, the conversation around him is off the charts, like way more than even the Legend Bay discussion in the spring or Brock Boyd or anyone else. Like this is a persistent, continual reminder from people in the Woody saying, hey, do not be surprised when this happens.
Yeah, and there won't be any surprise if Devin Sanchez goes out and dominates in week 2 down in Austin. But I do think it's worth at least pointing out, he hasn't done that yet.
Yeah.
When we mentioned the question marks at other positions, not for lack of confidence, not for lack of ability, it's the uncertainty of going out there and actually proving it for the first time, not just as a projection, not just as potential. Yeah. So, even when we say at the start of the beat presented by the Waterworks that he's locked in at this spot and he's going to be a lockdown guy in that role. Oh, all right. Well, September 12th is going to tell you what he learned from the moments that were both good and some that were bad a year ago, which is totally fine and totally normal for a true freshman. But then if we're going to say year 2 of Jeff Okudah or becoming Denzel Ward or whoever you want to name and fulfill that legacy at that position, those are the opportunities, and especially on a schedule that includes, quarterbacks of the caliber of Arch Manning or Dante Moore at Oregon or USC with Jaden Mayavia. I don't know if I'm getting that name right, but whoever.
He's good.
I'll get learning at those names better at that as the year goes on. But you're going to need your corner to be your best corner to be your best corner.
I think what is most interesting to me is that the last 2 games of the season a year ago were clearly Jermaine Matthews' worst 2 games, but they were also clearly Devin Sanchez's best. And so how did both of those guys take those moments and spin them forward? We talked in the spring about Jermaine being just seemingly a little bit angrier than he had been previously, and he acknowledged it, said he was not happy with the way the season ended. Is he still holding on to that? Is it playing with emotion, or is emotion playing with him?
Oh, that's interesting.
Thank you. I just came up with that.
I like the way you flipped that.
Thanks. Those are the things that are going to be important for a guy like Jermaine, who is extremely.
He's fueled by emotion.
He's a volatile personality. It is riding the wave. Devin is not. Devin is much more under control. So it'll be interesting to see how those guys play out. I think the thing that we see for sure, much like the defensive line conversation, much like linebackers, is like the position groups for the corners and safeties are deeper than they've been in a long time. Because we're not talking at all about the real conversation at safety, which is you're going to have 4 guys that you trust,
right?
In Leroy Roker and Terry Moore joining Earl Little and Jalen McClain. But then there's Blaine Bradford, there's Kamari Bing, there's Simeon Caldwell, there's Caden Gephardt, who people around the Woody have really, really loved in his early months at Ohio State. So you have a lot more depth there that you don't have to play this year, which is great. But I don't think people should write off freshmen anymore, saying that these guys are not going to play, especially when they are Blaine Bradford coming from Baton Rouge, and like that's a huge win for Ohio State. If with his brother playing at LSU, like if you don't give him a chance, you might see Blaine Bradford and Fahim Delane as LSU safeties next year because they're this similar type of player. So I think it really sets up an interesting conversation for Ohio State when it comes to playing those other guys this year, because in a normal season with a normal Ohio State schedule, like you can pinpoint 7-8 games and say, oh, these guys will probably play in this game, this game, this game. And now without there's no redshirt rule, but like 5 for 5 doesn't matter at a place like Ohio State. So you still have to find a way to get these guys on the field and get them their experience. So
we'll see what that experience looks like as they get rolling into training camp, which is starting on this Thursday. here's what's coming. We've got post-practice interviews. Well, it's all going to be open. And if you've got tickets and you want to go check that out, you can. Or don't have tickets yet, buy them now and go hang out. Post-practice interviews for us will include Ryan Day, Luke Montgomery, Devin Sanchez, and Peyton Pierce. So that will be day one. We'll have snap judgments when that is over. We will also be ready to dive into the Freaky Friday mailbag and get into that for the final episode of the Beat of the Week. Of course, there's going to be a lot more Snappy Jays rolling through Friday and Saturday because both of those practices are open as well. But we are well and truly back and looking forward to your questions from the Austin and Birm Show at gmail.com, the Austin and Birm Show at gmail.com. And of course, we're fired up to be back at the Woody.
So excited.
It's here, folks. Celebrate. It is time. He's Birm. I'm Austin, and we will talk to you very soon.